Okay, so good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This evening's Camco Board Roundtable is on reserve studies and capital project planning. And with me tonight, well, I apologize. I guess I should introduce myself first. My name's Fran Shoemaker, and I'm one of the directors here with Camco. And then with me, I have Jennifer Keegan, who is with Bustamante Engineers. So I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Fran, so much. And thank you everybody for attending. This is amazing. This is really a good turnout. I'm excited. So I have a little bit of I have a presentation that just kind of goes through some of the, some general information about reserve studies. And I figure we can do questions at
Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Jen. I apologize when
There
when
we
I
go.
muted everybody, it muted you too. So
It's all good. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if anybody can't see it, let me know because I have two screens and I'm never quite sure which one it's going to pop up on. So let's see what happens here. And we want to go here. So, all right. Can everybody see that? It should be the PowerPoint for the reserve studies. Oh, wonderful.
yep,
Okay.
we got you.
Perfect. All right. So this is kind of let's see. There we go. Okay. Can you, I think it switched screens on me.
Yeah,
Can you
it's
still see
okay. We're seeing your
it?
side,
Yeah.
not the presentation side.
Right. This is what I was afraid was going to happen.
Gotta
I
love
have to,
technology, right?
I know. I like, see, okay, wait, when it comes back. Oh man, sorry guys. I think I can do this. Huh. Slide. So So truthfully, I'm not really sure how to get it to change to the other screen, right? Oh, here we go. I have to go back to the screen. Yep, hold on.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay, sorry, I apologize, technology. That's always my biggest fear. Okay. So this presentation basically just is the who, what, when, where, and of reserve studies. So I'm going to kind of go through the little bit of all of just the background pieces to it, what you're going to see, and then we'll take some questions at the end, like I mentioned. So the okay, now we're not, there we go. All right. So as Fran said, my name is Jennifer Keegan. I'm a director at Bustamante Engineers. So I'm a vice president in charge of, I do all the community association work up until when it gets into structural. And then we kick you over to Joseph, who's on the other side, who's in charge of the structural community. He's in charge of like decks and stuff like that. So we're a local engineering firm out of Doylestown. I mostly do all of the reserve and transition studies now. I don't do much design anymore. Used to way back in the day. So now I kind of stick to reserve studies. They tend to be my favorite thing. So I love talking about this stuff. So for the agenda for tonight, we're just going to go over what a reserve study is, the different building blocks of it, the different levels of service for your reserve study, when to get an update, why we need to do them. I'll just briefly touch on some capital project things to think about, and then we'll have questions at the end. So the first is, what is a reserve study? This is pretty much the basic question, right? So it's many things. It's a funding plan, and it'll help the community fund and come up with money to replace common area components in the future. And it's important to remember that this is a tool. So we're going to try and do this study every 3-4 years. And, with that, it is going to change. So That's why it's not a one and done item. It's a tool that is going to help the board to determine what they're responsible for. And then it's also going to help the board make informed decisions about which projects should be completed in what order. And it's a systematic way to save money for non-annual expenses. And it's a strategy. It's a strategy for the board to maintain property values through upkeep of the capital infrastructure. And in that case, it really is important when you have roofs and exteriors that you have to upkeep all of your infrastructure. So some things that are not in a reserve study that should not be there. We don't want to have your operating expenses coming out of reserves, right? This is something we want to save for long-term costs. So we don't want to be paying insurances, utility bills. You don't want to be paying like your management fees out of this. This is something that you want to put into your operating expenses. Another thing is you don't want any annual or reoccurring bills to be in there. So if you do and pay trash removal every month, something like that's better handled through your operating budget and not through your reserve fund. So it's not an exhaustive structural inspection. If you live in a building that has interior entrances or has like a parking deck, we're going to look at stuff. It is just a visual inspection, but we're not going to do anything where we're like tearing apart or looking structurally at items. It's not a contractor's estimate. And sadly, it's also not your Pinterest board. It's not a wish list or aspirational planning. So it really is replace in kind. It's not supposed to be, large scale change of something. So the basic, there's kind of 4 parts. I break this down for a reserve study. You have your capital items. You're going to have your condition assessment. You're going to have cost, and then you're going to have your cash flow. So these are the 4 C's of your reserve study. And I'm going to go into each one of these into a little bit of detail, so you know a little bit what I'm talking about with each one. So the first one is your capital items. So this is your stuff that you're responsible for. These are your site components. It could be your roadways. It could be your driveways. So everybody's items are different and are going to be unique to your community because it's going to be based on what your documents say. So this is where your declaration comes in handy. Sometimes we get the lawyers involved to kind of interpret what they say because they can be a little hazy. Some of the older documents from, the 80s and 90s are not real clear. Some places, if you have a townhome, it could be your exteriors, could be your siding, your roofing. If you have interior entrances or if you have a clubhouse, it could be your interior items like your floor coverings. It can be interior lighting. If you have a hallway, on the interior where everybody enters from, it can be in your clubhouse. It can be your exercise equipment. It can be the kitchen appliances. If there's a kitchen in there, some people like to include the pool tables also that are in the clubhouse. Mechanical systems, this is usually the items that are found in the clubhouse. This is going to be your water heaters, your HVAC, heat pumps, furnace, whichever system you have, entry fobs, fire suppression. If you have a pool, it's going to be your pool filter and your pump. And community amenities, that's all the fun stuff, right? That's your pool, your pickleball courts, your tot lots, any of the fun items that, kind of make a community a really great livable place. So we're going to get the list all established. We're going to itemize everything. We're going to quantify it. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come on site and we're going to do our condition assessment. And like I had mentioned, this is a visual inspection. So this isn't something where we're digging up to see what things are. We're looking at things visually to get a feel for how they're doing. And a condition assessment, it can also be called a physical assessment. This is something where you, it's just kind of the same term, just used interchangeably sometimes. So part of the condition assessment is we're going to assign a remaining useful life. Everything is assigned an estimated useful life. That's the ideal predicted value. It's like I said here, it's the estimated time in years that a reserve component can be expected to serve its intended function if it's properly constructed. So those we get from tables, usually IRS or tax tables, kind of that type of information will give you the estimated useful life. So I'm going to use the example of roadways. When a roadway is newly paved, the estimated useful life is between 20 and 25 years. And there is always kind of a few years there. The remaining useful life is the estimated time in years that a reserve component can be expected to continue to serve its intended function. So that's something that we're going to assign when we're on site. So this is something that when we come out and look at everything, we'll give an estimate of how much remaining useful life is available. Now, when you do this, this helps to prioritize the replacement of items. So when we go and we put everything into a spreadsheet, you're going to start to see which items are being put up to the top to be replaced first. They're going to be the ones with the shortest remaining useful life. And as part of this, one of the other things that we'll ask your managers about, because a manager is really important in this process because they have a lot of information that can help us, is we're going to ask, have you been maintaining these items? Because if you're maintaining an item, it can actually help extend the useful life. It can extend the remaining useful life. And if you're not maintaining, sometimes you won't necessarily get that full estimated useful life. There are instances where I've seen where things can be a little shorter than that. So I mentioned I'm going to talk about the pavement. So this is estimated versus remaining useful life of pavement. So we get a lot of questions about, can you actually tell the difference? And we can, but also, we'll kind of get some information from the manager or from previous boards or from the current board that'll help us out, but you can tell. So these are pictures that I've taken over the years. And I think I've removed there's nothing that tells what communities they are. So they've all been washed. But the one on the left, that was just paved 6 months before we were there. So it was really new pavement, and you can see how beautiful it is. There's no cracks in it. It's still nice and black. Like it's, that's should last 20 to 25 years now. Whereas the pavement on the right, we can see there's a lot of cracks. It's starting to get that alligator cracking look. This is probably going to need to be replaced pretty soon. I would say between 0 and 3 years. What'll start to happen is you'll start to get the freeze, the heave and thaw, and then you're going to get potholes next. So this is something when we're on site that we look at, and then that's how we assign the remaining useful life. Another one that's kind of easy to look at is your split rail fencing. So you can see the one on the fence on the left. That's actually pretty new, right? It's brand new. The wood is nice and clean looking, and still everything's intact. So after about, 10 years, we get the one on the right where we have organic growth. It starts to decay, it's splintering, it's cracked. So these are the types of things we're looking for when we're on site. So something like the one on the right, that really does need replacement. You can't have your fencing, you shouldn't have it looking like that. You want to, at that point, kind of replace it. So we're going to take these estimated and these remaining useful lives, and we're going to put them into our spreadsheet. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to assign costs to all of these items. So the costs are, it's important to note that they are averages for everything. So we're going to look at the roof and we're going to base that on an average. We're not going to go out to contractors and get, specific quotes from contractors. Generally based on the type of shingle we see, we, have cost tables that we can go off of. And if it's a more unique item, we can look it up in, we use national cost estimating guides. This is where we'll use the RS Means book. We also have engineers here in-house who are involved in a lot of different projects at different communities. So we have a pretty good library of prices that we can go to. So I can go talk to, one of the other engineers who's maybe doing a roofing project and see what are the current costs that you're getting. So we'll use that number in the study for unit cost. And then we're also going to use replacement of like items. So this is where we're going to put a cost in the study that is going to replace like with like. We're not going to do any type of upgrade. If you have a pool, we're not going to have replacement of the pool with, we're not going to go say, okay, we're going to change that to an infinity pool with a fountain and salt water. We're just going to stick with what you have is what you're going to go with. Any changes, that's outside of our study. So these are going to be like with like. And we always suggest, you know, when you go to do construction, that's when you're going to get your contractor's quote and get your actual costs. So sometimes too, if a board has a project that they're planning to do in the next year or two, we will use their actual contractor's quote if they have them available to us. And again, that's where our managers help us out a lot, because they can be like, yeah, they're planning to do this. It's going to be done in 6 months. We'll put that exact cost, because we want everything to try and be as accurate as possible. There are some unknowns, so it does make it a little difficult sometimes to see, you know, like sometimes with roofing, we don't necessarily know what's underneath the shingles. Well, we know there's plywood there. We don't know the condition of that sheathing. So we just will have to we do an estimate. When you actually get the work done, that's when you're going to get your true cost. So we've covered the first 3 C's. Now we're on to the last one, which is cash flow. So this is how you're actually going to fund all of this work. So this is handled through your either your monthly or annual assessments. I know boards do it, each one does it a little differently. Some just take one annual assessment, some get monthly assessments. The money will go into the reserve account, and then we'll do a financial analysis on that. So when you're funding your account, you have 3 goals that you can kind of use. And this is kind of like, it's kind of like Goldilocks and the 3 bears, right? There's full funding, which is where you're going to maintain 100% of the cost of those items in your study at all times. So that's a little too much funding. Then you have baseline funding, and this is where you build your reserves up and then you spend them right back down to 0. So that's almost a little not enough. That's going to leave you in a precarious situation. And then you have the one that's just right, which is threshold funding. And this is where you can determine your threshold funding you're not going to have the balance go below a certain dollar amount or below a percent funded. And that's something that we discuss with the board prior to doing the study. We kind of want to get a feel for how much are you comfortable having in there. And if there is no answer to that, we can suggest an amount and then talk about it when you get the draft report. So these goals and this funding, the goals come out through CAI, who CAI puts out all of these rules for reserve studies, and all of our studies are done using these rules and regulations that CAI puts out. So when you do the financial analysis of the cash flow, your goal is to try and figure out how stable your reserves are. Like, what is the status of the reserve fund? Are you adequately funded? Are you doing well for the next 30 years? Are you going to have enough money to pay for everything that you have planned to replace, or are you inadequately funded? So the financial projections go 30 years into the future, and it's based on, we use the given reserve fund balance at the time of the study. We combine that with the current assessments, and then we minus for construction projects in the future. And the construction projects are adjusted in the future for inflation. So this is always the big, the sticky issue. So a few years ago, inflation was really on the top of everybody's minds. It's kind of calmed down a bit, so we don't have as much discussion about it, but we do take into account inflation. And we think that's important because in the future, to replace a road is not going to cost what it's, what's happening right now. So we've currently been using around 3.25%. That's something that is a little bit up to debate, from some people want it higher, some people want it lower. It just depends, how you feel about I think about the future. So it is a number that's going to go over the course of the 30 years. So we try and be, we don't want to be too high on that, but we do take into account inflation because, nothing's going to stay the same price. So those are our 4 basic portions of a study. You have your components, your condition assessment, you have your cash flow. And then the next thing we're going to do is you're going to choose what level of service you want to have done. So with the studies, you can have a full study done. So your full study is going to be if you've never had a study before or it's been quite a few years. So if you have a study that's around 12 years old or 10 years old, we suggest you probably get a full study and you want somebody to come out and just kind of redo your component inventory. A lot can change in 10 years. You're going to redo the quantities. You know, that's going to include a site visit. We're going to do estimated useful lives for no matter what you get here as far as level of service. And you're always going to get the fund status, and we're always going to give you future funding options. But with the full study, you're going to have more in-depth look at the component inventory and we're going to redo all of the quantities of your actual items. So the next level of service would be an update with a site visit. And that's where we take the previous study that was done and we update it. So we'll use current costs. We'll go out and do a site visit so we can actually look at what the, useful lives are going to be. We'll also, at this point, we're only going to use the quantities that were in the previous study. We're not going to change them. We're going to use the same ones. But again, we are going to do a condition assessment on site. We're going to do an estimated remaining life, fund status, and future funding options. And then there's an update with no site visit. So we call this just a financial update. This is where we're just going to use information that's given to us. We're not going to go on site. We're going to use information from the previous study, and we're just going to, if the previous study said your roadway has to be replaced in 5 years, and we're doing this 2 years later, now that roadway is going to replace in 3. So it's just straight math where we're really doing with the financial update. If you've done a large project, that's usually a good time to do a financial update. So these levels of service are dictated by CAI. So the full study is what they call the level service 1. Update with a site visit is service level 2. And then an update with no site visit is service level 3. So that's another thing that's important to think about when you're going to do your study. Which level of service do you want? Do you want someone to come out and do a site visit? Do you not? Are you comfortable with the quantities from the previous study, or are you not? So these are just some things to think about when you're going out to get quotes for a reserve study. So, sorry, I forgot to. Okay. So question we get a lot is, when should we update the study? So we suggest every 3-4 years. New Jersey recently passed a law on this, and they're saying that max every 5 years. The timing really depends on, it's going to depend on the amount of infrastructure you have, the age of your infrastructure. If you're a newer community, you can usually get away with going more towards the 4 or 5 year range. As you start to get older and things are kind of depreciating quicker, you probably want to closer to the 3 years. Also, the amount of infrastructure you have. If all you have is a fence, a road, and a basin, you can probably go every 4 or 5 years. You don't necessarily need to do that a whole lot. If you have a lot more infrastructure where you have, a clubhouse and lots of amenities, you probably want to be, every 3 years or so. So we also suggest that you do an update after you have a large infrastructure project. That's when you kind of want to really see, how much has that dragged down your reserves? Are we still on track for other future replacements? Because yes, you did one large project, but there's a lot more probably coming behind that. So it's important to keep that in mind. And if you have, another time that we suggest to do an update is if you have items that are failing sooner than planned, then you probably want to start to do an update. So sometimes we'll see this with a community that's maybe newer, developer, maybe did their roofs a little quicker, and instead of getting a 20 to 25 year life out of that roof, maybe they're failing around year 15. If you find that out, we're going to say do an update right away, because you want to now start planning, because you're going to have less time to actually save for replacement of that structure, of that infrastructure. So the sooner you're going to have to replace something, the better to get the study updated, because it gives you as much time as possible to start saving for that. So this gets into our why. And we hear this a lot because, it's why should we have a study? Um, it's important. This is a really important tool for your community. It's basically, you're essentially in charge of, as a board, a little town, and you have to figure out a way to pay for all of this. And nobody's coming to save you with money. So I feel very strongly that it's a really important thing. Some government documents and some now states are actually starting to require them. So, you know, per the state statute, you should be doing it. It gives the one of the other things is it gives you clarification. We just did this one study where for years the board has been paying for sliding glass doors. We come out and do a study, and now we're realizing you shouldn't have been paying for them all these years. So there's some things where this helps to give you a list of what you should or shouldn't be paying for. Helps avoid deferred maintenance because it's kind of forcing you to pay attention to all of your infrastructure that you have. You can't just, put a blind eye to everything. And if I'm out there and I see something that's, looking really bad, I will for sure mention it. Not necessarily in the report because, that's something that can get published, but I'll definitely tell the manager, hey, I saw this thing that this should be handled sooner, maybe rather than later. This is a great way too to avoid special assessments, loans, and surprise costs down the road. We're seeing a lot of communities right now that are having to take out significant loans because the community was built in the 90s. Now their roofs are starting to come due. They have stucco that's becoming an issue, and nobody's saved for anything. So now you're getting a loan that's going to be with the community for the next, maybe 15, 20 years. We're also seeing a lot of insurance companies are asking about reserve studies now because right now we all know it's a tough insurance market. They're kind of looking to see, are you paying attention to this? Mortgage lenders are looking for reserve studies. I know Franny and Freddie were, asking, are you having this done on the resale docs? So that's something else. And it's just good to have a plan. I think it's just a nice way to have everything, listed out, explain what you have, and everybody's kind of clear on what we're responsible for. So the blank is intentional here because you can insert anything in this question. So why should I fund blank? I won't be living here in 10 years. So why should I fund for roads? Why should I fund for roofs? Why should I fund for sidewalks? So the board has a fiduciary duty to maintain the property values. And this is this is a really important way to maintain property values. If I pull up to a community and the tennis court is overgrown with weeds and the fence is falling down, you're definitely going to get a different impression of that community versus one where you show up and, the tennis court is freshly striped and you have perfectly new fence. There's, the property values are going to be dependent upon how these items look. So as a unit owner, you're benefiting from the capital infrastructure. So this is the big one with roofs. If you're living someplace, you're depreciating that item and it's giving you the benefit of having a roof over your head. So this is kind of a way you're kind of paying almost a toll to depreciate that item. And my very Pollyanna-ish answer is it's the right thing to do. It is what you should be doing as a community. So the one other question, another why question we get is, why should we be reserving for stormwater system or a retaining wall? That'll be there forever. So nothing lasts forever. And so the retaining wall picture on the right is not one that I took. All of our pictures they're not really good and they don't really show much, but we see some really incredible issues anymore with retaining walls. And, people are like, oh, they'll last forever. We're just going to not even pay attention to that or not put it in the study. We always strongly urge boards to include retaining walls because we're seeing a lot more failure with them. And it's probably just because everything's aging. A lot of these communities, the retaining walls are getting to be 35, 40 years old. So we encourage you to put really everything in the study. The picture on the left, I don't know if anybody can tell, but this is an inlet and this is a pipe. So what happened was the bank washed away, and it washed away the head wall, which is a massive and heavy piece of concrete. And then it pulled the pipe out of the next piece of pipe. So things don't always last forever. And we kind of we see the horror stories. So to me, I'm like, let's just save for this stuff, because these things are going to happen. So once you have all of these items in your reserve study and you go to actually replace them, this is just kind of a quick guide of, if you are going to replace something as a board, I suggest you get your professionals involved. So, the managers have a lot of referrals. Talk to engineers, talk to contractors, talk to other professionals. I mean, our engineers are really, most of them are pretty unique in that they will talk to you. I know engineers they kind of have that, everybody thinks they're real quiet or they won't talk. Our engineers love to talk about what we do. So they will come out, they can consult, they can talk to you about, what they think is happening, how you can fix it. And it just kind of takes the liability away from the board. The board is not expected to know how to fix or do everything. So we just say, get your professionals involved. So what are you going to fix? This will depend on what infrastructure needs to be replaced. And this is where you're going to, go back to your reserve study, and you're going to see, oh, roofs are, planned to be replaced before roads. So we're going to do those next. And as soon as you're going to replace them, I'd say, probably even a year before you're going to replace them, start talking to contractors, start having people answer your questions, because as a board, the more information you can learn, the more educated decision you're going to be able to make. So obviously the where is, it's going to be at your community. And it's important when you get people involved, it's going to help with, you don't want your infrastructure to fall apart. This leads to safety issues. It leads to resale values dropping, and it leads the board to liability. So we always say, you know, um, get somebody out there to kind of talk to you about any of these big projects, because usually you're talking very large sums of money and you don't want to just spend that lightly. One little horror story, we had a board that replaced roofs on their own, and then about 2 weeks later they had a really large rainstorm and all of the water was running in, and the roofer never put any of the flashing back. And when they went to go back after him, he was gone, because they had just gone with whoever they could find that was cheap. They didn't listen to their manager. They didn't listen to the professionals. And then they had a very large insurance claim and no money, no roof, and an insurance claim where the insurance company was kind of like, yeah, I don't know that we're going to give you that much. So they were kind of in a pickle because they didn't really listen to any other professionals. They wanted somebody who was cheap and quick. And I suggest don't doing that. At least talk to a few contractors or, engineers. We're always here. So at the end of all this, like, what does this even all mean? So first thing, make sure your community has a reserve study. And if you ever have questions about it, reach out to the person who did it. Just ask them questions about it. I will answer any question for anybody ever, because I feel like if you don't understand that study as a board or as a manager or as a community, it doesn't do anybody any good. It's just words on a page then. So really get and understand what's in your study. The community and the board, they should know what infrastructure they have to replace. So this is something, nice list. It's in the study. You then can always refer back to it. If people come to you and say, oh, you have to replace my driveway, you can go back to that study and be like, no, we don't. So you want to also, talking of professionals, you want to hire a reserve specialist. So reserve specialists are designated. It's a designation that comes through CAI. So I actually am a reserve specialist, and they have certain criteria that you have to meet in order to get the designation of being a reserve specialist. And this is someone then who's done a lot of these studies. So they've seen a bulk of information, and they've, usually are pretty good at handling most situations. And It's important to remember this is a tool. Things are going to change. I've gone out to communities and done multiple, every 3, 4 years. And one year we're saying we're going to replace the roads, and then we go out and I go out in 4 years and I'm like, whew, I'm like, you got some other problems here that maybe want to replace before the roads. So it's part of the process. These things are going to change. And the last thing is time is usually on your side with most items. As long as it's not failing quickly or failing tomorrow, you do have some time to start to save for these items. It gives you a little bit of time to start to save and get some money in your reserve fund so you have something to pay for the replacement of your capital items. So that's kind of all of my little spiel about what a reserve study is, and all the information that I could think of for who, what, when, where, and why. But have anybody has any questions, I can take them if you'd like.
I have some in the chat for you if you want to start with those.
Sure,
Um,
that sounds good.
So yeah, a lot of great information, and we got some great questions.
Oh,
So
good.
we had Scott ask, we have split rail fencing around our HOA preserve. We set that as an operational expense to repair as rails posts fail instead of a 10-year capital item. What are your thoughts on that?
So I have no issue with that as long as you are actually replacing it through your maintenance budget. So we do see, right, with split rail fence, you can kind of just replace out the broken or damaged rails. And if you're doing it that way, that's absolutely fine. I just want to make sure you're replacing it in some way. I was going to say, I can stop the share so we can see. There we go. Okay. So we're okay with that. And that usually is a board decision. Some items the board wants to have in the reserves and they'll do it all at once. Some items they want to do more through operating. So yeah, Scott, we're okay with you doing it that way.
And then Rocco had a question. Is it typical for a professional engineer to be involved with the study? I know you talked a little bit about that. If not, what qualifications should we look for in a company completing the study for us? So I know you did just speak to that. I don't know if you wanted to add anything there.
I will say that you don't have to be an engineer to do these studies. We strongly believe it's important, right? Like a lot of engineers. So prior to doing this, many eons ago, I actually was a highway designer. So I designed highways. So a lot of engineers have a lot more background in some of the items that we're looking at, which helps. But you don't actually technically need to be an engineer. I think a lot of the people that we deal with at other firms, most of us are all engineers, and then we've kind of drifted into the reserve study realm. I've never met anybody who said they were going to grow up and be a reserve specialist. So
That's what I was gonna say. I think everyone I've ever worked with is an engineer, but
yeah.
um, so another question from Scott, can large scale landscaping projects be considered capital reserve projects? And I know this one comes up a lot. So
This does. So that is something that CAI just changed their rules on. Last year, they updated the rules on reserve studies. And now, yes, large scale landscape projects and also tree replacement or tree removal can be put into the reserve study. So your things like your general landscaping that they come and put new flowers every year at the entrance and your mowing, you don't want to put that in the reserve study, but large scale projects can be included now. That was a change that was just happened last year. So we've been starting to include a lot of tree removal. I didn't realize how expensive it was to cut down a dead tree. So
oh no, my
yeah.
goodness. We did earlier have a question too as to who is CAI. So I did answer it in the chat, but I didn't know if we wanted to speak to that as well for anyone that didn't see the answer. So um, CAI, just so everyone knows, is the Community Association Institute. They provide education and resources to residential condos, co-ops, HOAs, and to people like Jen and myself as management companies and professionals that help out this industry. So great resource.
Yeah. They also they offer really good education too. If you ever go on their website, they have, some good, they have there's a webinar coming or actually that one's in person, but they are doing like they always are kind of up there advocating for associations. Like they're a really good resource every year in the April, beginning of May this year, they're having a conference. It's really good to go. They'll have education sessions. A lot of the managers attend to get continuing ed credits. So it's good to use for a
Yeah.
homeowner.
I was just going to say they have classes geared towards boards as well. So,
Yep.
um, another question that came in, Meg asked, what happens if the roads are in need of being repaired, but they are the township's road? What action is open to the board?
I would get everybody. So, okay. I also used to, as a municipal engineer, get as many of the people you can from your community and go to your township committee meetings because you're their constituents. And if you show up in mass, they're going to most likely, they'll start to listen to you. It's hard when you don't own the roads. Townships really don't always want to pay attention, but I would say you got to go talk to your committee members. They're the ones who are going to be your best advocate for that.
And Mickey asked, who is allowed to do a reserve study?
So technically it can be anybody. So it's sometimes we'll see out west a little bit more, like out like way west, like Arizona, Nevada, you get a lot more accountants tend to do them. Around here, I feel like it's more engineers, some architects I know that do them. So people that have construction backgrounds who actually have seen and know what the components are and how they fail. So it's kind of a mixed group, but around here it is more, I would say most of the engineering firms do them.
And then Mary had asked, what is Bustamante Engineers' relationship with Camco?
So we actually are just a third party vendor that will, do work for Camco. When the board chooses, we're just another engineering company. We don't real, I guess there's no real affiliation. Like we don't have any
No,
affiliation.
yeah. I was
Yeah.
gonna say a great resource, great
Yeah.
company to work with. So we do recommend them. Um, Christine had asked, what is the best practice for the level of reserving? So I think that goes back to like the threshold, the 5%.
Yeah, so okay, so there's a three different, we always suggest threshold because that's kind of in the middle. You don't want to be 100% and you don't want to be at zero. So you want to be someplace in the middle. With threshold funding, you can do a percentage of your overall total components. Some boards like to just set a number if they are comfortable with a certain amount. I've had some boards where they're like, we want to set it, especially if there's elevators involved. They'll be like, we want to know that we can always just repair it. We want at least 400,000. And there's also, you can go by percentage, a percentage funded, which is a percentage of the overall total cost. So there's different levels. If you're going to do percent funded, we like to see between 65 and around like 78. You want to try and stay in that range.
All right. And Mark had asked, who offers the financial options for big projects? Does that only sit with the Camco manager? I'm not sure.
Um,
Do you want to, Mark, do you want to unmute yourself and clarify or if you want to add some more information into the chat? Um,
Yeah. Oh, can you hear
go
me?
ahead. Yes, yes, go ahead.
When you talk about quite a large project, and then do we do an assessment? Do we borrow money? Who's supposed to advise us on the different routes? Obviously, the reserve study should get that moving years before, but if you're faced with it now, are there people that, for instance, does Camco have financial skills to be able to advise a board, or is that down to the newness or the experience of the Camco managing agent in front of us?
So yes, Camco does have an accountant that is assigned to each community. So if you are in the position where you would like to discuss different options for financing, we would involve your accountant. So the manager would reach out to the accountant, and they would be able to better advise on what options are available.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see here. Frank, I think it is. How do you handle capital projects that were not anticipated when a reserve was done, in addition to the community? So something new being added.
So that's during an update, we can add that in and plan for it now going forward. If it's not in the study and it's something that needs to be done, technically you should not be using the reserve money for that item. Now, I know that's not exactly
I'm
what's always
listening.
so.
We're there. This is real. This is now.
Okay, so this is happening. So
Yes.
like I think I'll just use an example that's will maybe kind of shed light on this. So a lot of communities in the past have not included any money for stormwater. And one of your stormwater items is your basins. And basins can get really bad.
Yes.
And so I do a lot of basin inspections and I see a lot of, 25 years later, wow, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be fixed. And townships are starting to crack down on this more and more. So I have seen boards where they have taken and used reserve money to pay for that. And then they will just try and do larger catch ups to they'll do a little bit larger every month to try and pay back that money that was originally not earmarked in the study. So technically, if you're being really militaristic, you shouldn't take it. But I mean, we all know, right? Like things happen. So
As far as legality goes, it's legal to do that. I mean, there's no what's the word I'm looking for? You're not going to get in trouble with the town.
oh, that is a question for your lawyer. But
Okay.
what we have heard from so this comes up a lot in Jersey now, where in New Jersey you're supposed to have a reserve study and a lot of boards are just like ignoring it. So I've talked to lawyers about this. It can leave the board open to civil litigation if down the road there's a special assessment for something else that was not being saved for. So some states do have laws though, where you can borrow against your reserves, kind of like how you borrow against your 401k, where you can borrow against the reserve fund, but then you have to show your plan to pay it back. So that's another way you could handle it. The litigation, it's still a little unclear at this point, what can happen. There is no real, like in Pennsylvania, there's no governing body that will get you in trouble. It would just probably be other people that live in the community.
Real. Yes.
Which is weird because then you're suing yourself, but that's.
Yeah, I always say that.
So,
Good.
you know.
All right. We had another question here from Wayne. What guidance can you give on setting a proper threshold spending level? So I know you talked about thresholds a little bit. Anything on setting the proper level that you want to add?
So you want to look at what you have as far as infrastructure. So if you have something that's really vital, say like an elevator, and you have people who rely on that to get up to the third or fourth floor, then that you want to probably have enough money that you can, replace an elevator if need be. So you kind of this is kind of a case by case basis with boards, and it will depend on how much infrastructure you have. The quick and dirty way, we say 15% of your total capital and replacement costs. That's kind of an easy low bar. You don't ever want to go below. Now, if you don't have a whole lot of infrastructure, you can kind of vary that a little, but it just goes by how much you have. So it does vary a lot.
A follow-up question from Charles here, which kind of goes hand in hand with this, is does the choice of threshold vary with time, like how old the community is?
We usually don't. I usually from day one, we do a lot of reserve studies after transition has happened when the builders left. I start right off the bat with what that threshold is. We're going to always want to stay. The threshold will change with the cost of the items though over time, right? Like everything gets more expensive. So the threshold's going to have to go up as the cost to replace goes up.
Thank you. And then David had asked if we can get a hard copy of the presentation. I do, just so you know, we do record these and they do get posted to our YouTube channel, which you can access by any of your managers that email you or any of our team members. You'll see in our signature, there's a little YouTube symbol there that you can click on and watch any of our past board roundtables. And then Jen, if you want to share the slides, I can certainly make that available for anybody that's interested.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can make a PDF and send it to you, Fran. Should I send it
Yeah,
to you?
yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody, if you want a copy, you're free to have it.
And then Steve had asked, or actually shared, just as a tip, for an upcoming road project, our board organized a committee, a civil engineer, two mechanical engineers, and a previous owner of an asphalt company. All were retired residents and saved the expense of hiring a professional firm. So do you want to?
That's wonderful. That's great.
You're
So you have
lucky.
a lot of resources. Yeah, you're very
Yeah.
lucky as a community, but definitely use committees. If you have a large replacement project, the board can't handle everything. Sometimes it is good to designate a committee, like you've done. The committee doesn't necessarily have to have engineers and contractors involved, but that committee can then spearhead that project and kind of get a lot of information that they can help feed to the board to help the board make their decision.
And then Paris had, I guess she missed the beginning and your introduction. So if you want to, she had asked if you're with CAI or a reserve study firm. So if you want to go over, I believe you guys you're members of CAI, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So we are members of CAI. So I work for Bustamante Engineers, and we're an engineering firm out of mostly Eastern Pennsylvania. We also do work in Delaware and New Jersey as well. But we're civil engineers. We do drainage design. We have structural engineers. I am not a structural engineer. That is, I hand that stuff off. And we do reserve studies, transition studies, building envelope studies. Really. Most all facets of engineering except for mechanical. We don't have any mechanical engineers.
And then Bill had asked if you can provide some guidance on costs for different levels of reserve studies. And I know you did discuss that a little bit as well.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so the cost of to actually do this study will vary based on how many components and how much infrastructure you have. So it's hard to kind of give a range. They do vary a lot. But we can give you a proposal always if you would like to.
And then Stacy had asked, how much funding should you have in your reserve account? Which of course would.
Yeah, so that's going to vary based on what components you have and how much infrastructure you're responsible for. So a community that has a lot of amenities, like a pickleball court and a pool and a clubhouse is going to be very different from a community that just has some roads and maybe a basin or two. So the amount is really going to vary based on what you as a community have.
And then David had asked, does the company completing the survey review the governing documents prior to completing the survey?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. If it's an update, we'll just go off of what the previous study is. If it's a new study, we will get the governing documents. A lot of times we'll get responsibility charts from the manager. So it kind of varies with what level of service we're doing.
Rocco asked, are reserve specialists limited as to where they can do studies? Like which state they do work in, I guess is what he's referring to.
So CAI, you're designated through CAI National. So it's basically I could do studies anywhere. It doesn't go state by state. It goes through the national CAI organization. So you can go really anywhere and do them.
Patricia had asked, is there a number for capital expenses to be in your reserves for weird capital things that could happen unforeseen, such as having projects completely ready to pay, and does that change over time?
Can you read that again?
Yeah, I was gonna say, Patricia, do you want to unmute yourself and maybe add a little more detail? Oh, I think you're still muted.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I can a little bit. I mean, it's, as you get older in your community, we're about 17 to 20 years old now. And, we're starting to find that some of our roofs are failing because of things that were beyond our control, at the outset. And I mean, should we, like, if you're responsible for sidewalks, driveways, not the stuff underground, but the stuff overground, should you be able to replace your roofs at any time? I'm just wondering because, I'm concerned about some of the stuff you don't know that was existing before you ever got there. And in the original build that doesn't crop up until 15, 20 years later, and you don't find that the materials are substandard until that time. Is there I know you had said 15%, but I guess my concern is for an older community, should that percent be higher? Maybe that's more the question.
It can be, yes. So what you just mentioned with the roofs failing early, that's something that when you have your reserve study done, you want to mention that to the reserve specialist and have your manager mention that, because then what'll happen is we'll shorten the lifespan. We're going to shorten the estimated useful life and the remaining useful life, and it's going to push everything closer to the front of the study to be replaced sooner. And then that will start to show, it'll start to affect the numbers of how much money you should be putting into that account. So the 15% is really, it's just the low bar that we don't want you to go below. But if you do have roofs coming up, then we want you to start building up to that amount so that you have it in your study to be replaced. The 15% is really just, it's really just we don't want you to go below this. I don't want you to hover around there for most of the life of the community, but sometimes we just need to give a number to people to shoot for, because it's funny, we had a 401k meeting the other day with the 401k people were here, and the guy's like, I've never had somebody retire and say like, oh, I have too much money. And I was like, that's funny. I've never had somebody say I have too much money in my reserve fund. And he's like, you get it. So I've never had a community be like, we have so much money. So sometimes we just need to give a number to be like, let's shoot for this so we can build up to that. But if you do have roofs that are failing sooner, I would have your reserve specialist move everything up and then start to, plan for those replacements sooner and keep more money in the account to account for that.
Christine had asked, are drones used in place of personal visits?
The only thing we use drones for is we don't have people go on the actual roof. We always come out personally. We tend not to climb roofs anymore because sometimes actually you can cause more damage, especially in the summer. So we drone the roofs instead of actually walking on them. And the footage is really good. People don't believe us, but it's unreal how clear
amazing.
it is.
Yeah.
Like zoom in, it's unreal. So yeah, we do come on site. The only thing, we'll be there flying a drone if we do use it.
Paris had asked, can you explain the difference between 15% threshold versus the 65 to 78% range you mentioned before?
Sure. So there's two different, those percentages are referring to two different ways of funding. So there's the threshold, which is just a straight calculation of 15% of your total capital replacement today. And that number is, if you wanted to replace everything in your community right now today, that's your total amount to replace. That percentage is taken of that. So that's the 15%. I then also mentioned between the 65 and 78. So that's a different calculation. That actually calculates over time and adds in depreciation. It's a little bit more complicated of a calculation, but that's called percent funded. That will also give you a dollar amount, which gives you the low threshold amount. The percent funded calculates every single year. It's a different amount because it takes into account the estimated and remaining useful life. It's hard to explain actually with no numbers in front of me to give examples, but they are two different ways of calculating the threshold. The 15% is just the easy one to kind of be like, it's much easier to see.
All right, that's all the questions I had in the chat. If anyone has any more, please feel free to add them. Or if anybody would like to unmute and ask questions, you're welcome to do so. Any other questions? Jen, I think you did such a thorough job explaining everything.
I hope everybody's just not really confused.
Well,
you
like
for
I said, you can rewatch this. It is recorded, so we will post that on our YouTube channel. And if you are interested in a copy of the slides that she shared, just reach out to your manager, your community manager, and they can, reach out to me if they need to. We'll have it saved for them to distribute. So thank you so much to everybody. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Great
Fran.
job.
Thanks,
Great
Jennifer.
job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
It's not
That's
always
very nice.
exciting.
Yeah, have a good evening.
Have a good Valentine's Day.
Thank you. You too.